Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're plunging straight into, well, a really explosive and chaotic time, early revolutionary Russia. Try and picture it. The echoes of revolution still loud, civil war just tearing the country apart, and the chilling grip of Stalin's power starting to tighten. It was an era that, promised so much, a brave new world, but also delivered just unimaginable brutality.
It's a period that didn't just test people, it forged them.
Yeah.
It was this crucible, really, where idealism and just raw violence clashed every single day. And out of that furnace came these voices, people trying to make sense of it all.
Exactly. And right at the heart of this is that Maelstrom was an extraordinary figure, a man many consider the greatest prose writer of Russian Jewry, Isaac Babel. His life, in so many ways, it didn't just reflect the incredible contradictions of the time, it kind of embodied them. It's a story of resilience, artistic truth, and ultimately, profound tragedy.
What's so fascinating, I think, is how Babel's own story, his personal journey, became just inseparable from that bigger historical picture. His choices, his struggles, his ultimate fate, they really shine a light on the dilemmas faced by millions who were caught up in that revolutionary wave.
Right. So our mission here in this deep dive is to try and unravel how Babel's Jewish heritage, his firsthand experiences, as a journalist, as a Red Cavalry soldier, and his growing clashes with censorship, how all that profoundly shaped his unique worldview and, of course, his incredibly powerful writing. We're going to explore his major works, trace his path from this promising young writer to becoming a victim of the Great Purge, and really look at the enduring vital legacy he left behind. So let's start right at the beginning in Odessa. Our story kicks off in this vibrant, often pretty rough and tumble port city, Odessa. Babel was born in the Moldavonka section. And this place, it just became this indelible backdrop for so many of his stories. Moldavonka wasn't just like a setting.
No, it was practically a character itself, wasn't it? Just teeming with life, different languages, a kind of, a certain lawlessness, you could say.
Yeah, definitely.
And what's really telling, especially when you think about the pressures on a young writer in the Soviet era, is this contrast. Babel sometimes described his family in his writing as sort of destitute, muddle-headed shopkeepers. But the reality—
It's different.
Quite different, yeah. It seems that was a bit of a strategic fabrication, maybe necessary for a young Soviet writer. His father was actually relatively well-off, a dealer in farm implements, owned a big warehouse. It just hints at that pressure, the need to shape your own story to fit the new ideology.
That's a fascinating point, that idea of strategic fabrication. But even with that background, he still faced huge systemic challenges, didn't he? Just because he was Jewish. Like the strict quota for the Nicholas Odessa Commercial School and being blocked from Odessa University purely because of his ethnicity. How much do you think those experiences, that institutional discrimination, being an outsider, even with some resources, how much did that shape him, his ability to see society from different angles?
Oh, it's absolutely fundamental, I think. Being blocked from university meant he pursued private tutoring and ended up with this incredibly diverse sort of self-driven education. He studied the Talmud, music, and developed this lifelong obsession, really, with French writers like Maupassant and Flaubert. He even wrote his earliest stories in French.
But when French—
Yeah. And that early exposure, that French literary sensibility, the precision, the clarity, almost Maupassant-like, combined with his Jewish cultural background, it was crucial. It led him to depict horrific violence, not with, romantic heroism, but with this stark, almost clinical realism. That, plus an outsider's Jewish view on the revolution. It gave him this unique lens. He could capture everyone from peasants and soldiers to rabbis, even befriending, as he said, whores, cab drivers, jockeys, just the whole spectrum.
And this path, this self-education, it led him to Petrograd in 1915, which was a really bold move, right? Giving the restrictions on where Jews could live the pale of settlement laws.
Absolutely. It was a defiant step moving beyond those confines. And crucially, it brought him into contact with Maxim Gorky. Gorky was a literary giant then. He published some of Babel's early stories, but also famously told him, go get more life experience.
Right, the classic advice.
And Babel really respected him for it. He later dedicated the story of My Dovecote to Gorky, saying he owed everything to that meeting. That mentorship was just foundational for him.
And he certainly took Gorky's advice to heart. He really dove headfirst into the new Soviet reality. I mean, look at the jobs he had during the revolution. Serving on the Romanian front, working as a translator for the Petrograd Cheka, the early Soviet secret police. A pretty terrifying organization, let's be honest.
Yeah, definitely not a desk job.
No way. And then reporting for Gorky's paper, Novaya Zizin, until Lenin shut it down, and later for the Dawn of the Orient. What did that kind of direct exposure to war and internal security do for his writing?
Well, as he put it himself, his journalistic work gave me a lot. He gathered this incredible number of facts, talking to morgue attendants, criminal investigators, government clerks, this raw exposure to life and death, to the messy, often brutal realities of the new system. It became this invaluable creative tool for his fiction. It gave his stories an authenticity you just couldn't fake. It was hard-won.
And nowhere is that raw, visceral experience clearer than in his masterpiece, Red Cavalry. So in 1920, Babel gets assigned to Commandant Semyon Budyonny's 1st Cavalry Army during the Polish-Soviet War. Talk about gaining life experience. This was a plunge right into the thick of it.
Absolutely. And his 1920 diary, it meticulously documented the horrors of the war he saw, just unfiltered. That diary became the raw material, the bedrock for Red Cavalry. It's a collection of short stories. You probably know pieces like Crossing the River's Brutes or My First Goose. And these stories, they just drop you right into the conflict, showing a picture worlds away from any kind of heroic propaganda.
What's so striking about Red Cavalry, I always think, is that contrast. The almost jarring difference between the horrific violence he describes and what people said was Babel's own gentle nature. You feel the weight of what he witnessed, but also the sensitivity of the person watching. How did he manage that, to bridge that gap in his writing?
Well, that's exactly why it was so powerful and, frankly, so unsettling for many people at the time. His honest portrayal of the brutal reality, especially the actions of the Red Cossacks, it wasn't revolutionary propaganda at all. And it made him powerful enemies. Marshal Budyonny, the commander, was absolutely furious about Babel's unvarnished descriptions of marauding Red Cossacks. He even demanded Babel be executed.
Executed? Just for writing, honestly.
Yeah. It was Gorky's influence, again, that shielded Babel and made sure the work got published. It really shows Gorky's power back then, but also just incredible courage on Babel's part to tell those truths.
It's hard to imagine the courage that took, and the literary impact was just immense. Jorge Luis Borges, he wrote about Red Cavalry, saying something like, "The music of its style contrasts with the almost unspeakable brutality of certain scenes." He mentioned one story, Salt, saying it had this glory usually reserved for poems people knew it by heart. That's pretty amazing for prose.
Borges really nailed it there. It's work that forces you to see harsh truths through this incredibly crafted, almost lyrical language. But after witnessing all that devastation, Babel eventually went back to Odessa, his hometown. What kind of stories came out of that return?
Ah, yes, the Odessa stories. This series really brought the Moldavanka ghetto to life, didn't it? In this way that was both kind of romantic, but also really gritty. And this is where we meet one of the great anti-heroes of Russian literature, Benyakrik.
Benyakrik, yeah. Loosely based on a real historical figure, Mishka Yaponchik. Babel turned him into this fictional mob boss whose exploits captured the whole world of Jewish gangsters before and after the revolution. And he portrayed this underworld with such nuanced toughness, yes, but also this unexpected, almost poetic sense of morality sometimes.
So after the brutal realism of Red Cavalry, we get Benyakrik. It feels like a totally different world, maybe even exploring a different kind of truth, a different kind of chaos. Was he consciously shifting gears, do you think? From the chaos of war to the chaos of societal upheaval?
I think he absolutely was. Babel saw the world through this lens of contradictions. Benyakrik was another figure navigating chaos, maybe with his own code, like the Cossacks, but in a totally different arena. These stories show his genius for finding the universal, the struggles for power, for justice, for survival, even in these very specific local settings. He wasn't just writing about gangsters, he was writing about a community trying to figure itself out. And it wasn't long before these stories jumped off the page. They were adapted into a film in 1927, Benyakrik, and also a play, Sunset. Sunset really focused on Benyakrik's sort of self-appointed mission to right the wrongs of Moldavanka, which even included dealing with his own alcoholic father.
But Sunset got a mixed reaction, right? Especially in Moscow. Critics there felt his portrayal of the bourgeoisie was contradictory and weak.
Yeah, the reception was definitely mixed. But it also had some really significant admirers. Boris Pasternak, for instance, saw something powerful in it. He felt it showed Jewry as an ethnic fact, as a phenomenon of positive, unproblematic importance and power. And Sergei Eisenstein, the filmmaker, admired it too. He compared it to Emile Zola, saying it illuminated capitalist relationships. That split really highlights how complex Babel's work was and how fast the ideological ground was shifting under everyone's feet.
It really does. It shows Babel was always pushing boundaries, exploring things that didn't quite fit the neat Soviet narrative of the heroic working class, that complexity, that refusal to simplify things. It became a very dangerous path to walk.
Increasingly dangerous, yes.
Yeah.
As the 1930s began, That shadow over Soviet society and over Babel started to get much deeper. His play Maria is a perfect example. It was incredibly candid, depicting political corruption, prosecution of the innocent, and black marketeering right within Soviet society. He wasn't backing down from uncomfortable truth.
And this time even Gorky warned him, didn't he?
Yes, Gorky, who had protected him before, gave him a direct warning. He told Babel about the political inferences that could be personally harmful. Gorky clearly saw the danger escalating with Stalin's purges, and he was right. Maria was actually canceled by the NKVD Stalin's secret police during rehearsals in 1935. Didn't get a Russian premiere until 1994. Just think about that. A stark measure of the repression.
Wow. And Babel was also seeing other brutal realities firsthand. He traveled in Ukraine in 1930 during the forced collectivization.
He did, and he confided privately to Antonina Piroskova, who became his common-law wife, about the sheer brutality of forced collectivization and dekulakization. Dekulakization being the regime's term for removing or eliminating the more prosperous peasants. He spoke of the destruction of the village across our land. He was seeing the human cost right up close, more grim life experience.
As Stalin tightened his grip, demanding absolute conformity to this artistic doctrine called socialist realism.
Which basically meant all art had to serve Soviet ideology, yeah.
Right. Babel, in what seems like a subtle act of defiance, increasingly withdrew from public life. There's that famous, darkly ironic comment he made at the 1934 Congress of the Union of Soviet Writers. He called himself the master of a new literary genre, the genre of silence.
That's such a powerful, chilling line, isn't it? The genre of silence. It just perfectly captures the suffocation, the slow strangulation of artistic freedom that was happening.
It really does. It felt like not just his silence, but a whole generation being silenced.
Exactly. It's this tragic testament to how art resists, even when it can't speak openly. And Babel's life in the 30s was just full of these contradictions. On one hand, he had this exceptional status, privileges, even a dacha, a villa, in the writer's colony at Peredelkino. But his wife and daughter were living in Paris. He visited Paris in 1932 and apparently agonized over whether to go back to Soviet Russia. He longed to be a free man, but he was also terrified he wouldn't be able to make a living as a writer outside the Soviet system.
That constant tension we see in his life, his Jewishness and Soviet ideals, the violence he wrote about versus his own nature, it seems like in the 30s, it became almost unbearable. These privileges, the villa, but his family's away, and he's wrestling with this impossible choice. How much do you think his later silence came from that internal conflict?
I think it came directly from it. It was an impossible situation. Yeah. He did ultimately return. He even ended up collaborating on some propaganda films like Eisenstein's Bezin Medora before it was suppressed.
Yeah.
Maybe he was hoping to find some way to survive within the system. But his core vision, his observations, they stayed true, even when they clashed with the official line. That agony, that choice between freedom and survival, it was the terrible dilemma for so many artists and intellectuals then.
And then came May 15th, 1939. The knock on the door. 4 NKVD agents arrived at his Moscow apartment, arrested him. It's just this chilling moment, the start of the end for so many during the Great Purge.
Yeah. And Antonina Piroskova, his partner, her account of that moment is just heartbreaking. Babel's last words to her. The worst part of this is that my mother won't be getting my letters, and later telling her, I ask you to see that the child not be made miserable. Just devastating. From that day on, Babel basically became a non-person in the Soviet Union. His name vanished, erased from public records, even film credits he'd worked on.
And the charges were, of course, completely fabricated. Trotskyism, terrorism, spying for Austria and France. Absurd. And after 3 days under horrific pressure, almost certainly beaten, he confessed. He even named friends like Eisenstein and the writer Ilya Ehrenberg.
Which must have been agonizing. But then, incredibly, he retracted it. He told the authorities, I slandered several people. I am innocent. That courage to recant a forced confession under those circumstances, knowing what would likely happen, it's astounding.
It really is.
And then you get this chilling detail. January 1940, Lavrenti Beria, the head of the NKVD, presents Stalin with a list. Enemies of the party. Babel is number 12. And Stalin just marks it. Yes, sealed. Just like that. It shows the absolute, terrifying personal power involved.
His trial, if you can even call it that, lasted 20 minutes. January 26, 1940, his last recorded words. I am innocent. I have never been a spy. I was forced to make false accusations against myself and others. I'm asking for only one thing. Let me finish my work.
He was executed early the next morning, January 27th. Shot. His body thrown into a communal grave. And the truth about this, it didn't come out until the early 1990s after decades of official lies and cover-ups. Just a horrifying end.
And the tragedy just echoes. Think about his unpublished writings. Antonina Perovskova spent nearly 50 years trying to get his manuscripts back. Translations of Sholem Aleichem, a novella called Kolya Topuz, about an Odessa gangster adapting to Soviet life. The KGB eventually just claimed they were burned. Imagine that loss. Irreplaceable. But despite everything, despite the attempt to erase him completely, Babel's voice couldn't be silenced forever. His official rehabilitation finally came in 1954, during the Khrushchev thaw. They found absence of elements of a crime, a huge moment, starting to acknowledge the Stalinist injustices.
And that meant his works could be republished. At first, they were censored, pieces missing, but eventually, during Glasnost in the late 80s, they were fully restored. You remember those quotes Gorky supposedly called him the best Russia has to offer? Konstantin Postovsky saw him as the first really Soviet writer, and Judith Storr-Sandor summed it up so well. His literary sensibility was French, his vision Jewish, and his fate all too Russian. That unique combination is what makes him so compelling.
And that unique voice, it just keeps influencing writers. American authors like Hubert Selby, James Salter said Babel had the three essentials of greatness: style, structure, and authority. George Sanders reads Babel to recalibrate my ear. What is it about his writing that resonates so deeply across cultures, across time?
I think it's that unflinching honesty, combined with his incredible lyrical brevity. He could distill huge, complex realities into these sharp, vivid images he just refused to simplify. He showed you the brutality and the beauty, the heroism and the depravity, often in the very same breath. And that creates this kind of moral tension, It forces you, the reader, to confront difficult truths. And that, I think, is what recalibrates your ear. It recalibrates your moral compass, too.
And back in Odessa, his birthplace, his memory is still very much alive. They unveiled an Isaac Babel memorial in 2011. He's seen as this integral part of Odessa's multicultural identity. Although history being history, it's complex. Even recently, in 2024, there's been debate about potentially removing the statue under derussification laws. Some point to his service in the Bolshevik Red Army, while others fiercely defend him as vital Odessan heritage.
It just shows, doesn't it, how these figures, even someone so tragically wronged, remain tangled up in ongoing cultural and political debates. Babel's story is a powerful reminder that cultural heritage is never simple. It's always being re-examined through new lenses.
So if we try and tie all these threads together, Isaac Babel's life, his incredible talent, his immense courage in showing brutal truths, and then his ultimate tragic silencing. His short, brilliant life really stands as this testament, doesn't it, to the power of artistic vision against the crushing force of political oppression. His struggles, his contradictions, his commitment to his art, it makes his story just incredibly moving.
Absolutely. His legacy isn't just in his books, it's in the questions he makes us ask. About being human, about art, about the societies that can both create and destroy their most profound voices.
Right. And it leaves us with a really provocative thought, I think. What does Babel's story tell us? Not just about art and power or the artist's responsibility in turbulent times, but also about how a society comes to terms with a past that both produced and then brutally destroyed figures like him. How do we today preserve that complex, often uncomfortable tapestry of history and literature, especially when it holds such stark, heartbreaking contradictions? It's definitely something worth thinking about, particularly with all the ongoing debates about monuments and memory and who gets remembered and how.